Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our quarterly press briefing. Today, our Director General, Ms. Carol Coy, will be reporting on some key indicators for the first quarter of 2021. Ms. Coy will also be releasing the Consumer Price Index for June 2021 and the Labor Force Survey for April 2021. Thank you for joining us, and I now hand over to Ms. Carol Coy.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining today's digital press conference. Today, we will be highlighting aspects of Jamaica's economic performance for the period January to March 2021, with an overview of the gross domestic product and the international merchandise trade statistics. We will also release the Consumer Price Index for June 2021 and the results of the April 2021 Labor Force Survey. I will start with the GDP. During January to March 2021, the spread of the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, and the measures implemented locally and internationally to control its spread continued to negatively impact the performance of the Jamaican economy. This was evident in the 6.7% decline in the total value added for the period relative to the corresponding period in 2020. And this decline was primarily due to the 9.9% fall in the services industries. There has, however, been a reduction in the rate of decline, with the 6.7% fall being the lowest since the second quarter of 2020. This was also reflected in the seasonally adjusted value added, which grew by 0.6% when the performance of the economy in the first quarter of 2021 is compared to that in the fourth quarter of 2020. I will now present on the economy's performance. For the first quarter of 2021, declines were recorded for all services industries, except for the producers of government services, which remained relatively unchanged. Activities in the services industries continued to be impacted by the COVID-19 containment measures and the downturn in the global travel industry. The main contributors to the decline were hotels and restaurants, which fell by 55.9%, the other services industries, which fell by 21.9%, wholesale and retail trade, repairs, installation of machinery and equipment, which fell by 5.1%, and the transport, storage, and communication industry, which fell by 7.8%. Value added for the goods producing industries, however, grew by 2.6%, and this was mainly attributable to higher output levels in construction of 10.5% and mining and quarrying of 7.1%. However, declines were recorded in the agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry and the manufacturing industry of 2% and 1.1% respectively. The decline in agriculture was due in part to dry conditions in some of the major producing areas, coupled with the aftermath of the damages sustained to agricultural lands due to the heavy rainfall which occurred in the fourth quarter of 2020. Turning to the international merchandise trade for the first quarter of 2021. The international merchandise trade provides information on the movement of goods between Jamaica and the rest of the world. For the first quarter of 2021, Jamaica's total spending on imports and its earnings from exports declined relative to the similar period in 2020. Imports was valued at $1.3 billion US, a decline of 2.3% when compared to the similar quarter in 2020. This decline was largely attributable to lower imports of consumer goods, which fell by 13.9%, and transport equipment, which fell by 20.3%. Earnings from total exports decreased by 0.1% to $354.6 million for the review period relative to the first quarter of 2020, and it was due to a fall in alumina of 3.7% and a decline in refined petroleum products of 23.6%. Turning to the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. And just a reminder that the CPI measures changes in the general level of prices of consumer goods and services purchased by private households. The index does not reflect changes in individual consumer tastes and preferences or changes in the standard of living due to changes in income level. And this is the most widely used measure of inflation. The inflation rate for June 2021 was 0.7%, and here we are comparing the movement in the index to May 2021. This increase was impacted by a 1.9% upward movement in the index for the heaviest weighted division, food and non-alcoholic beverages. The increase in the index for the food and non-alcoholic beverages division was due mainly to higher prices for some agricultural produce, such as yams, potato, lettuce, and cabbage. Other notable increases recorded within this group were cereal and cereal products, which went up by 2.6%, and this would include items such as bread, meat and other parts of slaughtered animals, which went up by 1.9%. Also contributing to the overall inflation rate was a 5.9% increase in the index for the division restaurant and accommodation services. And this was due to higher prices in the class restaurants, cafes, and the like, and a 0.4% increase in the index for the transport division, and this was due to increased petrol prices. These movements were, however, tempered by the decline of 2.4% in the index for the housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels division, which resulted mainly from the fall in electricity, water, and sewage rates. The point-to-point inflation, and this is where we are comparing June 2021 over June 2020, was 4.3%. When we look at the regions for June 2021, the inflation rates for what we call the Greater Kingston Metropolitan Area was 0.6%, other urban centers was 0.7%, and rural areas inflation rate was 0.8%. Now I'll turn to the labor force, and we are releasing the April 2021 labor force. And again, a reminder that the labor force survey, this is a quarterly survey that measures the number of persons employed, unemployed, and outside the labor force as at a reference week. Be reminded that the labor force survey does not measure the number of jobs created. STATIN did not undertake a labor force survey in April 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures implemented by government of Jamaica to limit its spread. As a result, we are unable to present the usual comparison with a similar quarter of the previous year. The current release highlights the April 2021 labor force survey findings and provides a comparison with April 29 survey. Now we look at the employed labor force. Persons are considered employed if they are engaged in economic activities for at least 1 hour during the reference week. For the April 2021 survey, the reference week was March 21 to 27, 2021. Based on the findings from the April 2021 Labor Force Survey, it is estimated that 1.2 million persons were employed in the labor force. This was 40,500 or 3.2% fewer persons when compared to the April 2019 survey. The number of males decreased by 30,600 or 4.4% to 661,900. There were 544,100 employed females, and this was 9,900 or 1.8% less than that in the April 2019 labor force survey. Looking at the employed labor force by industry group, for April 2021, the industry groups with the highest number of employed persons was the wholesale and retail, repairer of motor vehicles and motorcycles industry, and this industry employed 233,200. The next largest industry was agriculture, forestry, and fishing, and that industry employed 192,200 persons. Construction was next with 118,400 persons. The arts, entertainment, recreation, and other services industries employed 106,900 persons, and the real estate and other business services employed 105,000 persons. Relative to April 2019, the largest declines in the number of persons employed were observed in the following industries: the arts, entertainment, recreation, and other services, and this fell by 17.1%, and the accommodation and food services activities, which fell by 18.1%. And we would know that these industries were those that were most heavily impacted by the measures put in place to limit the spread of COVID-19. Relative to April 2019, increased employment were, however, recorded in the industries, real estate and other business services, and this industry had 17,300 more persons than in 2019, an increase of 19.7%, and the construction industry, which had 7,600 more persons than in April 2019. Looking at the employed labor force by occupation group, the occupation groups with the most employed persons were the professionals, senior officials, and technicians, which employed 271,200 persons, service workers and shop and market sales workers, and this group employed 265,400 persons, skilled agricultural and fishery workers, and in this group we had 185,800 persons. Elementary occupations had 157,400 persons, and craft and related trade workers employed 155,100 persons. The group service workers and shop and market sales workers had the largest decline in the number of persons employed. There was a decline of 10% or 29,500 persons in this group relative to April 2019. Females accounted for the majority of this decline. The second largest decrease was found in the group elementary occupations, which fell by 8%. Now we'll turn to the unemployment figures. For April 2021, there were 119,400 unemployed persons. This was an increase of 13.5% or 14,200 in the number of unemployed persons when compared to the labor force of April 2019. The number of unemployed males was 53,400, an increase of 34.2%. In comparison, the number of unemployed females was 66,000 compared to 65,400 in April 2019. The unemployment rate for April 2021 was 9%, For males, it was 7.5%, and for females, 10.8%. Looking back at the unemployment rates for the quarters starting January 2020, we see that in January 2020, the unemployment rate was 7.3%, July was 12.6%, October it was 10.7%, and January it was 8.9%. And as I said earlier, the unemployment rate for April was 9%. Looking at youth unemployment, the unemployment rate for youth, that is the ages 14 to 24 years, this was 24%, 4.6 percentage points higher than that in April 2019, when it was 19.4%. In April 2021, the unemployment rate for male youth was 21.1%, and for female, the unemployment rate was 28%. Looking at the size of the labor force, in April 2021, there are 1,325,400 persons in the labor force, and this was 1.9% fewer than that in April 2019. There were 715,300 males and 610,100 females in the labor force. Compared to April 2019, the male labor force declined by 2.3% and the female labor force by 1.5%. Looking at outside of the labor force, the number of persons classified as outside the labor force was 769,000 in April 2021, and this was 30,900 more persons compared to April 2019. There were 312,700 males and 456,300 females outside of the labor force. This was an increase of 6.6% for males and 2.6% for females relative to April 2019. STATIN, I'll now look at the impact of COVID-19 on the April 2021 labor force. STATIN continues to field questions related to the impact of the novel coronavirus on the labor market in Jamaica. Data from the April 2021 labor force survey showed that over 40%, which is about 498,200 of the employed persons, experience either a complete or partial loss of income from employment since March 2020. Work from home continued to be an option for employers and employees. 10% of the persons employed, which is 122,200, spent at least one full day working from home or a similar location during the reference period. These persons were mostly females, 88,500, and more than half of these persons, 57.4%, working from home were in that occupational group: professionals, senior officials, and technicians. Since January 2021 quarter, a set of questions was included to assess the compliance of Jamaicans with the COVID-19 control measures. Data from the April 2021 labor force survey showed that 94.8% of persons stayed inside during COVID hours, 90.7% said they wore a mask when in public, and 88.4% practiced social distancing. I'll just mention briefly the population and housing census and the pilot that we conducted earlier this year. STATIN recently completed its data collection for the pilot phase of the 2022 population and housing census. This phase is a fundamental part of the census planning program, as it allows for a comprehensive test of all census processes. The pilot was conducted in a sample of communities island-wide. We thank the householders for their cooperation with our census takers and we look forward to the continued cooperation for the main census, which is due in April 2022. In closing, I take this opportunity to acknowledge the work of the management and staff of the Institute. STATIN thanks the respondents who continue to take time out of their busy schedules to participate in our household and business surveys. We reiterate the need for continuous participation in our surveys. We also thank the respective ministries, departments, and agencies for making administrative records available for the compilation of official statistics. We assure the public that the information provided to STATIN is kept in the strictest confidence and is only used for statistical purposes. The demand for data by policymakers to make informed decisions has increased significantly in light of the pandemic. While data collection has been impacted negatively due to the spread of the virus, STATIN continues to provide information to the government of Jamaica to enable effective planning and decision-making. We continue to collect the required data while observing the established COVID-19 protocols. The safety of our staff and mitigating the risk of COVID-19 spread to our respondents remain a priority of the Institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Coy. We are about to get into the discussion section, and Ms. Coy will be supported by our Deputy Director General, Ms. Leisha Delati-Bodier, and our Director of Surveys, Dr. Natalie Simpson. The floor is now open for questions. No questions yet? Okay. All right, so we have one question, and this question is from, is it Miss Atkinson from CN TV? Her question is, the government has loosened some restrictions for the entertainment industry. How is that expected to impact the level of employment in the arts and entertainment industry? And I think that question is for Dr. Simpson.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Garvey Green, and thank you very much for that question. So as you would have probably heard us say from time to time, that we do not make speculations about exactly what will happen with the labor force or the labor market. So we are not going to speculate about exactly what will happen as a result of the loosening of some of those measures. What I can say, though, is that we are currently in the field with our July labor force. And so it is likely that we may see some changes or movement in the numbers of persons employed in that industry when we report on the July labor force in October. So you can look out for that. Join us again to see if there is any movement or if we're reporting on anything significant for that industry.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Simpson. We also have a question from Douglas McIntosh from the Jamaica Information Service. What factors contributed to the marginal increase in the unemployment rate?
Okay, so what we can report on is the areas that we saw movement, and Ms. Coy would have indicated some of those. So when you look at, of course, there were 40,000 less persons unemployed approximately, and an increase in the number of persons who are unemployed. That was 14,200. And of course, persons went outside labor force, 30,900. So where we saw the movement, Ms. Coy highlighted some of those occupations and industries. We're talking about service workers, salespersons, so shop and market sales workers, and we're talking about persons in the group elementary, and then industries such as arts, entertainment, recreation, and other services, and accommodation and food services activity. Those were the industries that we saw the largest movement in between the two periods that we're comparing. So again, we're comparing the April labor force, April 2019 labor force with the April 2021. So those were some of the occupation groups and industries that we saw major movements.
Thank you, Dr. Simpson. I think there's a question from IRFM.
Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming this is my question. This is Javon Keys from Television Jamaica. I have a question here regarding the census. Now, we know because of COVID-19, the census had to be moved to next year. Wanted to find out whether or not that would create some kind of gap in the data collection, particularly as it regards to the tracking of the SDGs data, and how will we treat with that going forward?
All right. Thanks very much, Javon. Ms. Delati-Bodier will respond.
Thank you, Javon. So, as you can appreciate, there has been a lag in the collection of data for the census. And of course, this is something that is happening globally, so it's not unusual for us in Jamaica. There are a number of countries who have also postponed their census by a year in order to respond or to cope or give them time to adjust to what's happening with the pandemic. For us, it won't create a significant issue. Of course, we'll be late with some of the indicators because the data collection is a year late, but we are still on top of the monitoring of the SDG indicators, and we are committed to continuing the process of executing the production of official statistics. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Delati-Bodier. Just to remind persons that if they have questions, they should use their raise hand icon, and we will acknowledge you. So I will now allow the rep from IRFM to go ahead and ask question. While we try and get the Maisha Bodi from IRFM, I will see if there are any other questions. Okay, so somebody's asking, I think it's Charles. Could you please say something about the persons who are outside of the labor force? Who are they, and are they looking for work or willing to work if jobs were available? And that one is for Dr. Simpson.
Thank you very much for that question. I am not prepared with the numbers to speak to the proportion of persons who are outside the labor force by reason, which would include those who are, not currently looking for work or available or willing to work. But typically the persons outside the labor force include persons who are full-time students, persons who are retired, disabled, and persons who are keeping home, so persons who are engaged in home duties and so on and so forth. Those tables are prepared after the press brief and are typically a part of our annual review document at the end of the year.
Thanks, Dr. Simpson. I think we have Karina Bennett, who has a question.
Hi, morning, everyone. All right, so I have two questions. First, I would like to get an outlook on the economic performance for the upcoming quarter, and also to get a sense of if there has been any change in the consumer basket given the increases in prices recently.
Okay, thanks, Karina.
All right, thanks again, Karina, for that question. As Dr. Simpson indicated earlier, we do not speculate on what's going to happen next. What we do is we measure what has previously happened. So we wouldn't be able to speak to what is likely to happen in terms of the upcoming quarter. But again, we invite you to stay tuned, and we'll be here again in a few months to report on what happened. As it relates to the changes in the basket, the consumer price index basket, the CPI basket, is set, and we measure a fixed set of items, goods and services, over a specific period of time, usually about 10 years. So we would not change the basket just because of additional things that are happening in the economy. So it's the same set of goods and services that we introduced when we changed that basket last year that we would still be measuring right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Latibodier. I think N. Lewis has a question. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to understand if we have been factoring into the labor force the data pertaining to people who are earning through online means such as blogs and social media platforms. Those would include, for example, influencers and YouTubers. I know that more people, of course, especially in the younger age groups who've lost traditional jobs, have been venturing into online jobs, ghostwriting and such. So if we're capturing this data, where in your data would it be featured?
Thank you for that question. And Dr. Simpson will respond.
Okay, so let me take maybe I'll just go with it in the order that it was asked. So we would capture those persons. In the labor force, we generally ask persons if they've been doing anything during the reference week for pay. And so once they're doing it to earn an income, they would be captured in the labor force and they would be captured as employed. As it pertains to where exactly in terms of the occupation and industry that those persons would be captured in, I'm not prepared to tell you that at the moment. And I know that it's a field that is also developing, because you would realize that some of these things are more recent. We're currently using an occupation and industry classification that is a little bit older, I think, based on the 2008 international classification. And so that is a field that is also an area that is also being developed, so that we are able to see some of these social media influencers, be it on YouTube or Instagram, and be able to pull them out as a separate group. So I'm not entirely certain at this moment where exactly they're captured in terms of the occupation and industry. Maybe we'll release some information on that, on our social media page or somewhere else at a later date, but yes.
Thanks, Dr. Simpson. We have Moisha Brody. All right, so we'll try and come back to Maisha Brody. Are there any other questions?
Mrs. Garvey Green, while we wait for the other questions, my notes here suggest that the previous question about social media influencers, that those persons would actually be in other business services. That is the group that they are now, included in.
Okay, thanks. There is a question from Jamelia.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jamila Maitland here from TVJ. I noticed that the last 2 quarters, the mining industry recorded positive growth, and I wanted to find out to what extent Has the Gisco Alpart plant contributed to that? And if STATIN knows when things will be up and running at the Gisco plant. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that question. STATIN cannot say when the GISCO plant would come back in. We only basically deal with statistics. The issue, though, of the increase in the mining, GISCO closed, I think, in 2019. So the impact of the closure of GISCO, we would stop seeing that impact. So what we would now be comparing in this quarter would be those firms that are still in the industry. So the impact of the GISCO, I think we stopped seeing that impact, I think, in about the September quarter of 2020, its closure. But STATIN does not, as we have been saying before, we don't speculate. We measure what happens after the fact. So if GISCO comes back in, then you will start seeing those that information being shown in the performance of the industry. But we are not privy to that information, and we don't speculate as we say before.
Ms. Coy, I think the next question is for you, so I'll just read the ones that are for you so that you don't have to be moving back and forth. So, Maisha Brody wants some further updates on the pilot of the 2022 census. And Charles wants to know, could you please tell us what was the level of GDP at the end of March quarter relative to the level at the end of December 2020? And before you come, Ms. Coy, can I ask Jamelia to ask her question just in case it's a GDP related question for you as well? Jamila, did you have another question?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, the raise hand feature was just up again. Sorry about that.
All right, so those two questions are for you, Ms. Coy.
Okay, as I think was said before, the census pilot was a test to test our processes. So the information was not really to gather data with regards to the population. What it was is to test our processes, our recruitment processes, our data collection processes. And as you would have known, it's the first time we'll be using tablet computers in a census. So that was the rationale for the pilot, basically, is to test those processes. And we are now analyzing, we have done debriefings with the data collectors, and we are now analyzing the results to see how we can improve our processes in-house. With regards to the information of the seasonally adjusted, just to point out that in the seasonally adjusted data, we adjust for seasonal impact. And as at March 2021, the seasonally adjusted GDP, the value of it was $177 billion. And at December, it was $176 billion. So there was an improvement, as I said before, in the seasonally adjusted when you compare what was in quarter one, which is March, to December of 2020. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Ms. Coy. Are there any other questions? Just to remind persons that we release our data also on our website, and if you have questions or queries, you can send us an email at info@statinja.gov.jm, or you can visit our website or call our library at 630-16 19. Do we have any other?
Yes. Just curious if we're going to be able to access this recording shortly after the ending of the webinar.
Yes, you will.
All right, thank you.
Okay. The audio will be available on Facebook and YouTube, and we will send out a link as well to the persons who are on. All right, so if there are no other questions, thank you again for joining us. We look forward to having further engagements with our stakeholders. We invite you to join us next time in October for our next quarterly press briefing. Thank you.